Childhood is supposed to be simple, safe, a kind of time you look back on and feel warmth. But sometimes, it isn't like that. Sometimes, the memories that stay with you aren't the good ones. This story is about something I experienced when I was just 8 years old. It happened in a quiet neighborhood, in a small playground where kids laughed and played until the sun went down. But in that playground, there was something wrong. Something that seemed to wait for kids like me. And even now, decades later, I still can't explain it. I can only tell you what I saw. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You'll want to hear every second of this. When I was about 9 years old, there was this little playground tucked behind the elementary school I went to. It wasn't anything fancy, just a slide, a couple of monkey bars, and a pair of swings. But to us kids, that playground was like a second home. You know how kids are. We didn't need much to make an entire adventure out of a patch of grass and some old equipment. But there was this one swing. It looked just like the others, same rusted chains, same rubber seat worn down from years of kids using it, but for some reason, it always felt different. You could walk past the whole row of swings, and all of them would be completely still, except that one. It would be moving. Not a little breeze swaying it back and forth either. I mean really moving, like someone had just hopped off it. Sometimes it would creak loudly, cutting through the quiet, even if no one else was around. At first, we laughed it off. You know how kids do, we made up stories, saying it was haunted by the ghost of a kid who fell off and cracked their head open. Or that if you sat on it after dark, you'd feel hands pushing you higher, even though no one was behind you. Those were the kinds of stories we told each other to scare ourselves, but they stopped being funny pretty quick. One afternoon, I was the last kid left at the playground. My mom was late picking me up, and I was just kind of kicking rocks, waiting around. The other swings were still, completely still. But that one swing? It was swaying back and forth like crazy. I told myself it was the wind. But here's the thing, the trees around the playground weren't moving at all. The leaves weren't even rustling. I stood there watching it for way too long, frozen in place. Then, I swear to God, I heard the chain creak in a way that sounded like a breath, like the swing was exhaling. I bolted toward the parking lot, so fast I tripped and scraped my knee, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get as far away from that swing as possible. When I told my mom about it in the car, she gave me the classic parent line, "Oh, honey, it's just the wind." She didn't even look up from the road. But I knew what I saw. Of course, being kids, once I told my friends about it, it turned into this big thing. Suddenly, the swing was our haunted swing, and the new game was who could sit on it the longest after sunset. One Friday night, a group of us snuck back to the playground after dark. There must have been 5 of us, all huddled together with our little flashlights. The air was thick with that late summer heat, the kind where the crickets are screaming in the trees and every shadow feels alive. The swing was already moving when we got there. Not a slow sway, not like something drifting in the breeze. It was pumping, like someone invisible was sitting on it and pushing hard with their legs. We all froze, our flashlights shaking in our hands. Someone laughed nervously, but nobody stepped forward. Finally, one of my buddies, Trevor, puffed out his chest and said, "Fine, I'll do it. Don't be babies." He walked up to it, grabbed the chains, and sat down. The swing stopped instantly, just dead still. The silence that followed was deafening. Not even the crickets chirped. We all watched him, our stomachs tight. For a second, it looked like nothing was going to happen. Trevor leaned back, grinning at us, about to brag. But then, the swing jerked, hard. It wasn't Trevor moving it either. His hands were gripping the chains so tight, his knuckles were white, and his legs were dangling stiff in front of him. The swing yanked back, then forward again, harder than any of us had ever swung by ourselves. Trevor screamed. He tried to jump off, but his body just slammed forward like something was holding him down. The chains rattled violently, and his voice cracked into a high-pitched sob. Finally, he flew sideways off the seat, landing in the dirt, rolling to a stop. He scrambled to his feet, his face pale, and shouted, "It pulled me." We didn't wait around. We scattered like scared rabbits, sprinting for our lives. After that night, none of us wanted to talk about it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. See, Trevor wasn't the kind of kid who lied to save face. If anything, he liked making himself look tougher than he really was. And the way he looked that night, the way his body snapped back and forth like a ragdoll, he wasn't faking that. I started avoiding the playground during the day, but I found myself sneaking back at night. I'd stand behind the chain-link fence, just far enough to feel safe, and I'd watch the swing. It was always moving, always. Sometimes it would sway gently, like someone was just rocking back and forth lazily. Other nights, it would swing high, higher than I thought was even possible, without someone falling off. And the scariest nights were when it stopped completely, dead still, like it was waiting for me. That was when I started having dreams. In the dreams, I'd be sitting on the swing, pumping my legs, going higher and higher. At first, it felt fun, like flying. But then, the chains would start to stretch. Not just squeak, not just rattle. They'd stretch like they were alive, pulling me upward toward the black sky. And when I'd look down, the playground would be gone. It'd just be darkness. And someone would be climbing up the chains toward me. A figure with long arms and no face. I'd always wake up before it reached me, sweating and gasping for air. One night, my dad found me standing at the back door around midnight, staring out toward the schoolyard. He asked me what I was doing, and I couldn't even explain. All I could say was, "It's calling me." That's the word I used, calling. And honestly, that's what it felt like. Like the swing wasn't just moving by itself anymore. It was waiting. For me. I started noticing it more often after that first night. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself, it's just the wind, like I'd been telling myself for weeks. But the thing is, there wasn't always wind. Some nights it would be completely still, not a leaf moving, not a car passing outside, and the swing would be swaying back and forth, slow at first, then a little faster, like it was. Breathing. I'd sit on the couch and watch through the window, just staring at it. Half the time I'd convince myself it was the angle, or my tired eyes playing tricks. But then there were nights when I'd be standing right there in the kitchen, glass of water in hand, and it would start moving. Not like a gentle sway, like someone had walked up and shoved it. I'd freeze and hold my breath, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, just the chain clinking softly in the darkness. I stopped going out back at night. I'd leave my trash out by the curb and take the long way around if I had to step into the yard. I even started locking the back door even though I lived alone. That helped, I guess, but not really. Because it wasn't about someone getting in. It wasn't about a person at all. It was just moving. Sometimes I'd try to record it. I left my phone on the porch one night, thinking I'd catch it in the act. In the morning, I found the video. The swing had moved, but not the way I expected. It wasn't caught in the middle of a sway. It was standing perfectly still in the frame. Until the very last second, when it jerked forward hard, like someone had grabbed it, before the camera died. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. Friends would laugh, tell me I was imagining things. But I wasn't, and I was starting to realize. It wasn't just the swing anymore. I noticed footprints once. Bare, small, leading up to the swing and back to the yard, even though I had locked the gate and there was no one around. I followed them the next morning. They stopped halfway through the grass. No dirt disturbed beyond that. No sign anyone had been there. I tried convincing myself it was my own imagination. Maybe I'd been sleepwalking or dreaming. But I don't sleepwalk. I never have. Then the noises started. At first, subtle, like tiny clinks, chains tapping, almost like a rhythm. I'd hear it when I was in the shower, in the middle of the night, when I was brushing my teeth. Always outside. Always when I wasn't looking directly at it. The worst part was the feeling, like I wasn't alone, like something was waiting. I'd freeze, heart pounding, then convince myself it was a raccoon or a neighbor. But nothing. Nothing ever made a sound besides that swing. I stopped sleeping well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. Not in my backyard, in the corner of my vision. Even during the day. I'd glance outside while doing dishes or making coffee, and it would be swaying there. Alone, perfectly still 1 second, moving the next, like it knew I was watching. I started noticing patterns. Sometimes it swayed toward the house, sometimes away. Always at certain times, always in that same slow rhythm. Like someone or something was trying to tell me something. Or maybe just, watch me. The last straw came one night when I woke up at 3 a.m. I always check the clock when I wake up like that. The house was silent, except for the swing. The slow creak. Back and forth, back and forth. I stepped toward the window, and it stopped immediately. Just as I reached the glass, I swear I felt it, holding its breath with me. I stepped back, and it started again. Harder this time, faster, almost furious. And that's when I realized I wasn't imagining it. Something wanted me to notice. I couldn't stay inside anymore. I couldn't ignore it. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. And that's when I started thinking, maybe it wasn't just moving itself. Maybe it was moving because I was here. Maybe it was waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was following me. Even in the house, I could feel it, like a presence just behind me, in the corners of my vision. I started catching myself glancing outside, even when I knew it was daylight. I'd tell myself, it's just a swing, calm down, but every time I looked, there it was, swaying, slowly, waiting. One night I tried to get a closer look. I stepped onto the porch with a flashlight, just enough light to see the chains in the seat. The wind was dead calm. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing. And then, just as I was about to turn away, the swing moved. Not a little sway, not a gentle push, it lunged forward. The chain screamed. I jumped back so hard I nearly fell. And then it stopped, perfectly still. No wind, no one there. I thought about calling the police. But what would I say? "Hello, my swing is possessed?" They'd laugh and hang up. Even my friends, I didn't tell them anymore. I stopped talking about it. I was starting to feel crazy. I even slept in the living room for a while, couch pulled far away from the window. That helped a little. Mostly just made me notice it from further away, swaying in the yard like it didn't care where I was. Then, a few days later, I started hearing the other sounds. Soft, almost like whispering. Not words, not clear language. Just a soft, steady noise that came with the creak of the chains. At first, I thought it was the wind again. Then I realized it only happened when I was alone. When I had the blinds down, lights off, sitting on the couch, the whispering crept under the door. Soft, patient, waiting. I couldn't eat properly. Couldn't focus at work. I started keeping the porch light on at night, thinking that might keep it at bay. It didn't. In fact, the swing seemed to react to it. When the light was on, the movement got faster, more jerky, almost aggressive. I stopped sleeping entirely some nights. just sitting in the living room, staring at it, hoping it would stay still, hoping it would go away. And then it happened. The thing that made me realize there was no explaining it to anyone. I woke up one night, or maybe I never fell asleep at all. I can't really remember, and the swing was moving like never before. Fast, wild arcs, chains rattling. I went to the window and froze. The seat tilted toward me, like it was moving with intention. I stumbled backward, heart racing. That's when I saw the shadows, not just my own. Shadows stretching from the swing, across the yard, flickering against the fence. I blinked, and the swing stopped. Just like that. And then, impossibly, it started again. Slowly this time, inching forward like it knew I was watching, waiting for me to move. I felt trapped. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. Not yet. Something was holding me here, tied to this backyard, to that swing. I didn't know what, and I realized I wasn't safe anywhere. It wasn't just outside. It was watching, judging, patient, and I had no idea why. I couldn't take it anymore. I thought about leaving, just packing up and disappearing for a few days. But every time I imagined myself driving away, I'd see it in my mind's eye. That swing, waiting. I don't know why, but I felt like leaving would make it angry, or worse, lonely. The nights got worse. I started sleeping in shifts, a nap here, an hour there. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear it. Soft creaks, chains scraping, that faint whispering sound I couldn't understand. Sometimes, when I opened my eyes in the middle of the night, I'd see the seat tilt, as if someone invisible had just sat down. I stopped using the back door. I stopped going into the yard at all. The porch light stayed on constantly. Even then, I could feel it. Watching, waiting. I could see the faintest movement through the curtains, a shadow stretching across the yard, even when the swing wasn't moving. And sometimes, I swear it moved when I wasn't looking. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I forced myself outside. Flashlight in hand, knees shaking, I approached the swing. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely hold the light steady. It was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no sound. And then, just as I reached out to touch the chain, it swung toward me. Not gently. Fast, hard, like it wanted to hit me. I stumbled back, heart pounding. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. Something was keeping me there. The seat stopped inches from my face. And then, I heard it. The whispering. Clear this time, almost like a voice. Just one word. Watch. I froze. And then it happened. The swing moved again. But not just in the normal arc. It swayed in a pattern, almost like it was signaling me, pointing toward the corner of the yard where I'd never paid attention. My stomach turned as I shined the flashlight there. A pile of toys, leaves, small rocks, all arranged in a circle. I didn't put them there. No one else had been there. I backed away slowly. The swing continued, slow, deliberate. I felt, followed, even inside the house. I started seeing it in reflections. The glass of the window, my phone screen. The swing in the backyard, moving when it shouldn't. Watching me, waiting. And then came the night I finally understood. Or maybe I didn't. I woke up to the sound of the swing hitting the fence. Hard. Over and over. I ran to the window. The yard was empty, silent. But the swing, it wasn't at the end of the chains anymore. It was facing me, tilted, like it had turned itself toward the house. I couldn't sleep for days. I barely ate. I kept the porch light on, but it didn't matter. It was still there, always there. And I realized it had nothing to do with the wind, nothing to do with anyone. It was moving because it could. It was alive in its own way. And I didn't know why. The last time I saw it, it was a morning like any other. Sun coming up, the neighborhood quiet. I looked out the window, and the swing was still moving, slowly, gently, almost normal. And that's when I understood. Whatever it wasn't leaving. Not ever. I couldn't make it stop. I couldn't escape. I still live here. I still look out the window. The swing is still moving, just like it always has been. And I've stopped asking why. Some things don't need a reason. If you're watching this video and you have a swing or something in your yard that moves by itself, don't ignore it. Don't think it's just the wind. Just watch it and be careful. Thanks for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more real submitted experiences, stories that are stranger than fiction. And remember, sometimes what moves on its own is watching you back. Some gifts are meant to bring joy, but some carry warnings. Emma was 10 years old when she received a doll from her late grandmother, a porcelain doll dressed in a faded lace gown with glassy eyes that seemed to follow her wherever she went. At first, it seemed harmless, almost comforting, sitting quietly on her shelf. But that first night, as the house grew silent and shadows crept along her bedroom walls, Emma thought she heard a whisper. Just a faint, soft voice, one that sounded eerily familiar, almost like her grandmother, speaking secrets that no one else should know. And from that night on, nothing in her life would ever feel normal again. Emma placed the doll carefully on her shelf, adjusting its little lace dress so it would sit just right. She whispered goodnight, thinking it silly that she was talking to a toy, but something about the doll made her feel watched. That night, as she lay under the covers, the house was quiet, too quiet. The wind outside rattled the windows, and every small creak of the floorboards made her heart jump. Then she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. "Emma, come closer." She froze. Her eyes scanned the room. The moonlight cast shadows across the walls, and for a moment, she thought she saw the doll's head tilt, just slightly. She blinked, and it was back in its original position. "Must be my imagination," she whispered to herself, curling tighter under the blankets. But the whispers didn't stop that night. They came again, soft and deliberate, always just at the edge of sleep. Sometimes it was her name. Sometimes it was a question. "Do you remember?" Emma didn't understand. She didn't remember what. And every time she tried to tell herself it was only a dream, a chill ran down her spine. The doll's glassy eyes seemed to catch the moonlight differently each time she looked at it, as if it were aware she was awake. By the third night, Emma began noticing other things. Objects slightly out of place, her shoes not where she left them. A blanket tugged to the edge of the bed. And the whispers, they were growing clearer. "They're hiding something you shouldn't know." Emma's heart pounded. She wanted to tell her parents, but she couldn't. What would they say? That she had an overactive imagination? That she was dreaming? No one could know what she was hearing. And that, she realized with a sinking feeling, was exactly what the doll wanted. By the fourth night, the whispers had changed. They were no longer faint or accidental. Now, the doll's voice was clear, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. "Your brother? He hides something under his bed," it said. Emma's stomach twisted. She had checked his room countless times before and never found anything unusual. Yet the certainty in the doll's words sent a shiver down her spine. The next day, she tried to act normal, hoping her imagination would fade with the sunlight. But even in the bright living room, she felt the weight of the doll's eyes following her. When she glanced at it on the shelf, it seemed to lean slightly forward, almost as if it were listening to her every thought. That night, the doll spoke again. "Mom, she cries when she thinks you're asleep." Emma's mind raced. She had never seen her mother cry, and the thought that the doll knew something she didn't made her uneasy. She wanted to tell someone, anyone, but how could she explain this? A talking doll. Who would believe her? The doll continued, its voice low but insistent. "Dad, he's not who you think he is." Emma's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. The room felt smaller, the shadows thicker. She wanted to scream, to run to her parents, but a strange compulsion kept her in place, staring at the doll. It was as if the toy had some power over her, some way of holding her attention, forcing her to listen. Night after night, the whispers became more personal, more precise. The doll began referencing things only a family member could know. Hidden arguments she had never witnessed, secrets her parents had kept even from each other. Emma's fear grew into paranoia. She stopped sleeping well, constantly glancing at the doll, waiting for it to speak again. And every time it did, the words were more unsettling than the last. By the end of the week, Emma knew one thing. This was no ordinary doll. It was alive, in a way she couldn't understand. And it wasn't just speaking. It was watching, learning, and waiting. By the second week, Emma's life had begun to unravel. The doll no longer spoke only at night. It seemed to follow her, whispering in moments when she least expected it. While she ate breakfast, she thought she heard it murmur, "She doesn't love you the way you think she does." At school, she imagined hearing its voice in the quiet corners of her classroom, always hinting, always watching. The doll's revelations grew darker and more specific. "Your uncle, he comes here when no one is home," it whispered one night. Emma froze. She had never suspected anything of her uncle, but the certainty in the doll's voice made her stomach twist. "He hides things, dangerous things," the doll continued. She didn't want to know more, but the words burned into her mind, impossible to forget. Paranoia began to take hold. Emma started checking rooms repeatedly, peeking under beds, opening closets, convinced she would find whatever the doll was talking about. But nothing was ever there, at least nothing visible. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, corners of rooms darkening in impossible ways. Doors creaked when the house was empty. Objects shifted slightly when she wasn't looking. And always, the whispers came. One night, Emma awoke to find the doll sitting on the edge of her bed. Its eyes reflected the moonlight in a way that made her feel trapped. "They lie to you," it said. "They hide the truth from you. But I won't." Emma tried to scream, but no sound came. She covered her head with the blanket, hoping it would disappear. When she dared to look again, it was back on the shelf, perfectly still, as though it had never moved. Emma's parents noticed the change in her behavior. She became withdrawn, hesitant to speak, always looking over her shoulder. When she mentioned the doll, they laughed softly, dismissing it as a childish imagination. But Emma knew better. Every whisper, every glance, every movement of the doll was real. And every night, the doll revealed more secret things about her family that no one outside their walls could possibly know. "Your grandmother. She knew I would come," the doll whispered one night. "She tried to warn you, but no one listened." Emma's blood ran cold. Her grandmother had always been kind, always gentle. To think that she had somehow left behind this thing capable of watching and speaking across the grave, was almost too much to comprehend. And yet, there it was, night after night, reminding Emma that some secrets are never meant to stay buried. By the third week, the house no longer felt safe. Emma couldn't tell where her nightmares ended and reality began. Every creak, every shadow seemed amplified, and every whisper from the doll echoed in her mind even when she wasn't near it. She began noticing strange things. Doors slightly ajar that she was certain she had closed. Objects moved in ways that made no sense, and cold drafts that seemed to follow her through the rooms. One night, she awoke to the soft sound of giggling. It wasn't coming from her brother or anyone else. It came from the doll. Sitting upright on her desk, it tilted its head, glassy eyes glinting in the moonlight. "Do you remember now?" it whispered. Emma shook, unsure what it meant. Her heart raced, but she couldn't look away. Its words were like hooks, pulling her attention, forcing her to listen. The doll began speaking more frequently and more urgently, revealing truths that Emma didn't want to hear. "Your father. He's not your father," it said one night. Emma's stomach lurched. She wanted to deny it, to tell herself it was impossible. But the tone of the doll, so familiar, so commanding, left no room for doubt. And it wasn't just secrets. The doll seemed to know things before they happened. Small accidents, arguments, even thoughts that Emma hadn't spoken aloud. Sleep became impossible. Every night, the doll would whisper and move, even slightly, just enough for Emma to notice. Sometimes it would appear in different parts of the room when she awoke. Sometimes it would be closer to her bed than she remembered leaving it. Shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, growing longer, darker, bending toward her in corners where light should have reached. The house felt alive and malevolent. One particularly cold night, Emma awoke to find the doll standing on the floor, closer than it had ever been. Its tiny lips moved, forming words that seemed to vibrate in her chest. They lied. They lied to keep you safe, but I can't let it continue. A chill ran through her body as she realized the doll wasn't just talking, it was warning her. And yet, there was a sense of threat in its tone, an unspoken command that made her heart race with fear. Emma's attempts to speak to her parents about the doll grew desperate. She explained the whispers, the movements, the secrets, but they only dismissed her, growing concerned about her mental state. "It's just a doll, Emma. You're letting your imagination get the best of you," her mother said softly. But Emma knew better. The doll was alive. It wasn't imagining things. And as it whispered in the shadows, revealing truths that should have stayed hidden, Emma began to fear that the real danger wasn't the doll itself. It was what it knew, and what it planned to do with that knowledge. The whispers escalated. The doll spoke about past events Emma had no way of knowing, about her family's darkest secrets and buried mistakes. She wanted to tell you, but they wouldn't listen. "You have to remember." Emma's dreams became twisted reflections of her waking life, where the doll would appear in impossible places, whispering, guiding, commanding. Sleep was no longer a refuge. It was another room in the doll's world, and Emma was trapped inside it. By the fourth week, Emma's life had become a waking nightmare. The doll's whispers had transformed from faint, secretive murmurs into urgent, commanding statements. "You have to see. You have to remember," it would say, and she couldn't ignore it. She found herself wandering the house at odd hours, drawn to places she had never gone before: attics, basements, even locked closets, as though invisible hands were guiding her. Objects moved with a life of their own. Books fell from shelves, chairs slid across the floor, and shadows pooled unnaturally in corners. Emma often woke to find the doll in places it couldn't have reached, standing silently, waiting for her to notice. Its eyes glimmered in the dim light, almost alive, and the faint whisper of its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. One night, she awoke in a cold sweat to find the doll perched on her chest. Its tiny hands rested lightly on her shoulders, and its lips moved without a sound she could hear. And then the voice came, inside her head this time. "They lied. They hid it from you. You need to know. Before it's too late." Emma's world began to fracture. She could no longer distinguish between waking and dreaming. In her dreams, she would walk down familiar hallways, only to find them distorted doors stretched impossibly tall, shadows crawling along the walls, whispers echoing from rooms she had never entered. And always, the doll was there, watching, speaking, demanding that she remember things she didn't understand. The revelations grew darker. The doll spoke of secrets long buried, arguments between her parents that had never surfaced, betrayals by people she trusted, and something sinister in the family's past that no one had dared to speak of. She wanted to protect you, but they silenced her, it whispered one night. Emma realized with terror that her grandmother had left her the doll for a reason. To warn her, to guide her, but also to prepare her for something she couldn't yet understand. As the nights dragged on, Emma's fear became desperation. She tried to ignore the doll, to sleep with her door locked, to leave the house, but nothing worked. The whispers followed her. Shadows moved closer in the corners of her vision. Sometimes she would see fleeting glimpses of a figure small, pale, and familiar, like the doll had taken human form watching her from the hallway. One particularly terrifying night, Emma heard the doll's voice inside her room and outside it at the same time. "They can't help you. Only I can show you the truth," it said. The air grew colder, the shadows thicker, and the room seemed to shrink around her. She could feel its presence everywhere, and an unshakable feeling of dread settled in her chest. For the first time, Emma understood that the doll wasn't just a toy, wasn't just her grandmother's warning. It was something alive, something that had a plan, and that plan involved her. That night marked a turning point. Emma no longer saw herself as a passive observer. She was trapped in a world the doll controlled, where whispers dictated reality and shadows carried secrets. Every creak of the house, every flicker of light, every subtle movement in the corner of her eye was a reminder that she was being watched. And the doll was everywhere. Emma could no longer trust her own senses. The doll's whispers were everywhere now, sometimes soft, sometimes urgent, always commanding. "Go to the attic, you must see," it would say. Emma resisted at first, but an invisible force seemed to pull her toward the darkened staircase. The air grew colder with each step, and shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, twisting like black smoke. When she reached the attic, the room was dark, except for a single shaft of moonlight. Dust danced in the beam, and the doll sat in the center of the floor, perfectly still, its glassy eyes glinting as if it knew she would come. "They hid it from you. The truth. It's here," it whispered. Emma's hands trembled as she approached, the fear in her chest pressing down like a weight. Suddenly, the attic seemed to shift around her. The walls expanded, then contracted. The shadows began moving independently, crawling along the floor and walls as though alive. Emma tried to scream, but no sound came. The doll's whispers grew louder, repeating secrets she had never known about arguments, betrayals, and a family history that was far darker than she could have imagined. And then she saw it. A small, crumpled box tucked in the corner, wrapped in her grandmother's handwriting. Inside were letters, photographs, and journals, evidence of things her family had hidden for years. The doll's voice pressed into her mind. "You must know, or it will be too late." Emma's hands shook as she opened the letters. Each one revealed betrayals, lies, and horrors she had never been prepared to confront. As she read, the room seemed to close in, the shadows stretching over her like fingers. The doll stood on the floor, now eerily human in its posture, whispering secrets directly into her mind. "They will try to stop you, but I will protect you from them, or from yourself." Emma felt a surge of terror and confusion. Who was the real threat? The family she had trusted, or this thing masquerading as a doll? The attic door slammed shut behind her. She tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The doll moved closer, stepping toward her in ways that defied logic. The shadows swirled, forming shapes she could barely comprehend, faces, hands, mouths, all whispering in distorted voices. Emma's mind began to fracture under the weight of the revelations, the cold, and the oppressive presence of the doll. By the time the night ended, Emma collapsed in the middle of the attic, trembling and crying. The doll returned to its original place, sitting quietly as if nothing had happened. But Emma knew better. Something had changed. She had glimpsed a truth that was meant to stay hidden, and now the doll's influence had taken full hold. The whispers would not stop. The shadows would not retreat. And the doll, alive, knowing, and patient, was only just beginning. By the 5th week, Emma no longer knew what was real and what was not. The doll's whispers had invaded every corner of her mind, guiding her thoughts, influencing her dreams, and shaping her actions. Every step she took through the house was accompanied by a soft, insistent voice. Look closer, see the truth. They lie. She could no longer sleep, eat, or concentrate, and her parents grew increasingly concerned, though they had no idea just how real the terror had become. The doll's demands escalated. Go to the basement. You must understand, it whispered one night. Emma obeyed, her body moving on its own, as if the doll were pulling invisible strings. The basement was dark and cold, filled with boxes and old furniture, and the shadows here seemed to pulse and breathe. The doll's eyes glimmered in the faint light, and the air vibrated with whispers that overlapped and echoed. Family secrets, hidden fears, and truths Emma had never imagined. Objects began moving violently on their own. Books toppled from shelves, chairs slid across the floor, and the shadows twisted into shapes that resembled hands reaching for her. Emma could feel the presence of something watching from the darkness, something beyond the doll itself, something hungry and patient. And the doll's voice grew more urgent, more commanding. You must see before it's too late, before they come for you. Emma's dreams became indistinguishable from reality. In her sleep, she would find herself wandering through her home, only to see impossible things, doors that led to nowhere, hallways stretching endlessly, and figures in the shadows mimicking her movements. The doll was always there, perched on a shelf or sitting on her bed, whispering secrets, revealing horrors, and guiding her toward discoveries she wished she hadn't made. One night, she discovered a hidden compartment in the attic floorboards. Inside were letters and journals that revealed dark truths about her family, betrayals, hidden crimes, and a legacy of secrecy. Each revelation was accompanied by the doll's whispers. They wanted to protect you, but the truth cannot be hidden. Not from you. Not anymore. Emma's heart pounded as she realized the doll was showing her things she had no right to know, things that would change how she saw her family forever. The doll's influence became terrifyingly direct. It began manipulating the environment, doors slamming shut, lights flickering, shadows moving independently. Emma saw fleeting glimpses of impossible figures, tall, pale shapes that seemed to watch her from corners. And each night, the doll whispered more urgently, pushing her to uncover even darker secrets. You must remember. You must see. They tried to hide it from you, but I will show you. The culmination of the doll's power came one stormy night. The wind howled outside, lightning flashing through the windows. The house seemed alive, responding to the doll's will. Emma was drawn to the basement again, where shadows writhed like living things. The whispers became a chorus, repeating family secrets and truths in overlapping voices, filling the room with a deafening, oppressive presence. The doll stepped forward, now impossibly human-like in its posture, and its eyes glimmered with a sinister intelligence. Now you understand, it said. Now you see. This is the truth, and there is no turning back. Emma felt her reality shatter. She was no longer just a witness. She was a participant in something far darker than she could comprehend. The house, the shadows, the whispers, and the doll itself had become a single entity, an unstoppable force pulling her into a nightmare from which she could not escape. And as the storm raged outside, Emma realized with absolute certainty that her life had been claimed by something far older, far wiser, and far more terrifying than she had ever imagined. Emma collapsed to the floor of the basement, trembling, her mind barely able to comprehend the revelations the doll had forced her to witness. The letters, the journals, the whispers, all of it pressed into her like a weight she could not lift. The shadows in the corners of the room writhed as if alive, stretching toward her with intent, and she realized she was not alone. The doll stepped closer, its tiny porcelain face impossibly expressive, lips moving as it whispered truths that echoed in her mind. They tried to hide it, but you cannot unsee what has been revealed. You now belong to the truth, and the truth belongs to me. The voice wasn't just in the room anymore. It was inside her head, inside her very thoughts. Emma wanted to scream, to run, to throw the doll into the furnace and destroy it, but her body refused to move. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, plunging the basement into darkness. The whispers intensified, overlapping, merging into a chorus of voices, some familiar, some horrifyingly alien. They spoke of betrayal, fear, anger, and secrets buried for decades. Emma felt herself dissolving into the shadows, losing her sense of time, space, and self. The doll's eyes glimmered, now impossibly human, now impossibly knowing. You see it now, Emma, and there is no escape. A single blinding flash of lightning illuminated the basement. In that instant, Emma saw them, the distorted, pale figures that the doll had whispered about all along. They were watching, waiting, following the instructions of the porcelain thing that had once seemed harmless. The realization hit her like ice. The doll had not only spoken, it had controlled everything, guided every hidden hand, and orchestrated the terror she had endured. Emma's parents arrived the next morning, drawn by the storm, only to find the house silent. Emma was gone. The doll sat innocently on the shelf in her bedroom, glassy eyes glinting in the morning light, its faint smile unchanged. No one could explain the cold drafts, the shadows that seemed to linger, or the faint whisper that hung in the air. Emma, come closer. The house is quiet now, but the doll is still watching. Its eyes glint in the shadows, and if you listen closely, you might hear the faintest whisper of a name, maybe yours. Emma's story may have ended, but the whispers are not gone. If this story gave you chills, hit the like button and subscribe for more tales that will keep you awake at night. Turn on notifications if you dare, because some toys aren't just toys, and some secrets are never meant to be uncovered. Our next story comes from 3 siblings who, as children, shared a terrifying experience at a neighborhood playground, one that still haunts them into adulthood. It was the summer of 1999. 3 siblings, 2 brothers, and their younger sister grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew everyone, where backyards blurred into each other, and kids spent endless hours outside until the streetlights came on. Their house sat only a block away from a small playground. Nothing fancy, just 2 swings, a slide, a seesaw, and one of those old creaking merry-go-rounds that always seemed unsafe. During the day, it was alive with kids. But at night, the place transformed into something eerie. Empty swings moving with the slightest breeze, shadows stretching unnaturally long under the street lamp, and silence. Too much silence. The siblings weren't supposed to go out after dark. But that summer, with their parents often working late and boredom gnawing at them, they made a pact. Once their parents were asleep, they'd sneak out, walk to the playground, and have the whole place to themselves. It felt rebellious, exciting, almost like an adventure. The first few nights were harmless. They whispered, played tag in the dark, dared each other to swing as high as they could without making noise. They felt invisible, like they had the whole world to themselves. But one night, everything changed. The siblings remembered the air was unusually still. No breeze, no crickets chirping, just heavy, oppressive quiet. They slipped through the backyard and padded down the familiar path to the playground. The dim street lamp buzzed above, throwing weak light onto the swings. That's when they noticed something was off. Both swings were moving back and forth, faster than the wind could possibly push them. The chains creaked, cutting through the silence like screams. The siblings froze, exchanging nervous glances. The oldest brother muttered that maybe the wind had picked up, but the youngest pointed out what they all saw. The trees weren't moving. Not even a leaf stirred. Then came the sound, slow, deliberate creaks from the slide ladder. The siblings turned their eyes upward. Perched on the very top of the slide was someone. At least, it looked like someone. A figure too tall, too thin, sitting in an unnatural crouch. Its long arms draped over its knees, its head tilted to one side as if it had been waiting. They couldn't see its face clearly, but they swore its eyes caught the light, reflecting like an animal's, glinting faintly red in the dark. No one spoke. No one moved. They just stared, rooted to the ground. Finally, the younger sister whispered, "We should go." That whisper was enough. The figure's head twitched, snapping toward them with a jerk too fast, too sharp, like bones cracking. And then it started to rise, its limbs unfolding in slow, exaggerated motions, towering taller and taller above the slide. That broke their paralysis. The siblings bolted, sprinting down the block, their bare feet slapping the pavement, lungs burning. Behind them, the slide groaned, metal straining as if something impossibly heavy shifted its weight. They didn't stop until they were back in their beds, pretending to be asleep. None of them spoke of it that night. The next morning, their parents confronted them. Not about sneaking out, but about screaming. Neighbors had called, saying they heard children shrieking in the middle of the night. The siblings swore they hadn't screamed, but the memory of that silent sprint made them wonder if maybe they had. When they finally broke down and told their parents what they saw, their father's face hardened. He told them sternly, "Don't ever talk about it again, and don't go back to that playground at night. Ever." The way he said it wasn't disbelief. It was fear. For years, the siblings kept their secret. But the nightmares came. Each of them, at different times, dreamt of the playground, the swings moving, the slide creaking, and that impossibly thin figure watching. Sometimes in the dreams, it was closer. As adults, the siblings moved away, started their own lives. But at family gatherings, late at night, they'd sometimes bring it up again. What struck them was how consistent their memories were. Every detail matched. The glowing eyes, the jerking head, the endless arms. And when they compared notes, something new emerged. Each of them remembered hearing a sound right before the figure looked at them. The youngest remembered laughter, high-pitched, distorted, like a child's giggle slowed down. The middle sibling recalled whispering, words he couldn't make out. And the oldest remembered hearing his own name. Decades later, when the playground was demolished and replaced with newer equipment, the siblings thought maybe the nightmare was finally gone. But one summer night, visiting their hometown, they decided to walk past the new playground, just to see. Just to prove it was only childhood imagination. The swings were brand new. The slide was a bright, clean plastic. The grass was freshly mowed. It all looked safe, cheerful, ordinary. Until they noticed the swings again, both moving, back and forth. The air was still. No wind. And sitting at the top of the new slide was something too tall, too thin, waiting. The siblings refused to talk about what they saw that night. All they'll say is that the figure hadn't changed, not after decades, not after the playground itself was torn down. Some memories you can laugh off as imagination, Others stay with you forever. If you made it this far, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true horror stories every week. But tonight, maybe avoid looking at the playground down your street. You never know what might be sitting there, waiting. And so, the memories of that summer never truly faded, lingering like shadows in the corners of the mind. Some nights, if you listen closely, you might hear the echoes of laughter that isn't quite yours, reminding us that the past sometimes stays closer than we think. Sweet dreams, if you can.